In 2012, there was a woman in Mumbai who was, by every conventional measure, at the pinnacle of her career. She had spent nearly 2 decades managing billions of dollars at one of India's most prestigious investment banks. She was a managing director. She sat in corner offices. She flew business class. She commanded rooms. She was 50 years old, and she walked away from all of it. Not to retire, not to slow down, but to start over. What happened next didn't just change her life. It changed the way hundreds of millions of Indian women think about beauty. It rewrote what it means to build a business in India. And it made Falguni Nayar one of the wealthiest self-made women on the planet. This is her story. Falguni Shah was born in 1,963 inches, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, a city with deep roots in commerce, in trade, in the ancient art of doing business. Gujarat has produced some of India's most celebrated entrepreneurs, and the culture of enterprise was not something written in textbooks for Falguni. It was something she breathed. Her father ran a small bearings business. Not glamorous, not world-changing, but it was built with his own hands, sustained by his own intelligence, and it taught Falguni something that no business school could. That building something from nothing is not reckless, it is a kind of courage. Falguni was sharp, observant. She watched how her father navigated uncertainty, how he made calculated risks, how he treated people. These early lessons would echo through every decision she made decades later. She went on to study at Sydenham College of Commerce and Economics in Mumbai. And then, in a move that would define her trajectory, she secured a seat at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. In India, this institution is not just a business school. It is a passport, a signal. Among the most selective institutions in the country, it produces the kind of graduates that every top firm in finance, consulting, and industry will fight over. Falguni excelled. She was precise, analytical, and by all accounts, quietly determined. She didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to command it. After graduating in 1985, she joined Kotak Mahindra Capital Company, and she would spend the next 18 years of her life there, rising steadily, methodically, through the ranks. Investment banking in India in the late 1980s and 1990s was an exhilarating, sometimes chaotic frontier. The liberalization of the Indian economy in 1991 unleashed enormous forces. Foreign capital poured in. New companies were listing on stock exchanges. Old industries were being restructured. And Falguni Nayar, she had married Sanjay Nayar, also a prominent figure in Indian finance, was right at the center of it. She advised companies on mergers and acquisitions. She helped businesses access capital markets. She evaluated risk at the highest levels. Year after year, deal after deal, she built a formidable reputation. Not just as a competent banker, but as someone with extraordinary judgment. By the time she became managing director and CEO of Kotak Mahindra's investment banking division, she had done something remarkable. She had become one of the most powerful women in Indian finance, in an industry dominated by men, in a country still working through deeply embedded gender hierarchies. She had not just survived, she had led. And yet, something was stirring. Falguni Nayar was, by her own admission, someone who had always harbored an entrepreneurial restlessness. It wasn't dissatisfaction with her work. She loved the intellectual challenge of banking. But as she reached her late 40s, she began to notice something that her analyst mind found impossible to ignore. A gap. A massive, gaping, almost absurd gap in the Indian market. To understand what Falguni saw, you have to understand India in the late 2000s and early 2010s. India's middle class was growing at a pace the world had rarely seen. Hundreds of millions of people were moving into higher income brackets. Young women, in particular, were entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers. They had disposable income, they had aspirations, they were consuming media television, magazines, and increasingly, the internet that told them about global beauty brands, luxury skincare, international fragrances. They wanted these things. They wanted to buy them, but they often couldn't. India's organized beauty retail market was, at that time, deeply fragmented and deeply inadequate. If you lived in Mumbai or Delhi, you might find a decent selection at a department store or a specialty retailer. But even then, the experience was inconsistent. Products were limited, authenticity was questionable. And for the hundreds of millions of Indians who didn't live in a major city, the situation was far worse. Local chemists stocked a narrow range. Gray market products were common. Counterfeit cosmetics were a genuine problem. Global beauty brands existed in India, but their distribution was thin. Their retail presence was concentrated. They hadn't cracked the challenge of reaching the vast, hungry Indian consumer base. Falguni saw this clearly. She had spent her career understanding markets, their structures, their inefficiencies, their pressure points. And this market, the Indian beauty and personal care market, was screaming for disruption. She began to research. She studied what had happened in other countries when e-commerce platforms entered the beauty space. She looked at how curated specialty beauty retail had transformed the category in the West, how offering a wide selection of prestige products under one roof, combined with expert guidance, had completely changed how consumers related to beauty. She examined the trajectory of online retail in rapidly developing economies, and she looked at what was happening in India's e-commerce sector. The first major domestic online marketplace had launched in 2007. International giants were entering the Indian market. The infrastructure, while still developing, was beginning to take shape. Mobile phone penetration was accelerating. Broadband was expanding. Digital payments were becoming more common. The timing, she calculated, was almost perfect. Not because everything was in place, but because everything was about to be. Falguni Nayar understood something that many entrepreneurs miss. The best time to enter a market is not when the infrastructure is fully built, but when it is being built. When you arrive after the highway is complete, traffic is already heavy. But if you arrive as they're laying the asphalt, you can claim your lane. There was one more element to her insight, and it may be the most important one of all. In 2012, Indian e-commerce was dominated by horizontal platforms, generalist marketplaces, selling everything from electronics to books to kitchen appliances. These platforms were not built for beauty. They didn't understand the specific needs of a beauty consumer, the desire for discovery, the need for product education, the importance of curation, and above all, the absolute non-negotiability of authenticity. A woman buying a lipstick is not making the same decision as someone buying a phone charger. She's making a choice about how she presents herself to the world. She needs to trust that the product is real, that it is safe, that it is what it claims to be. Nobody in Indian e-commerce was speaking to that specific need. Nobody was building that specific trust. Falguni Nayar decided she would. In 2012, at the age of 50, Falguni Nayar resigned from Kotak Mahindra Capital. Let that sink in for a moment. 50 years old, managing director, corner office, guaranteed salary, 18 years of accumulated prestige, gone by choice to start a beauty e-commerce company. In the business world, people talk a lot about calculated risks, but there is always a gap between the calculation and the leap. The calculation is intellectual. The leap is something else entirely. It requires a form of self-belief that most people, even very successful people, cannot summon. Because what you are betting is not just money. You are betting your identity. You are betting everything the world has told you that you are. Falguni Nayar made that bet. She named her company Nykaa. The name comes from the Sanskrit word meaning one who is in the spotlight, the leading lady. It was a deliberate choice. The woman at the center of Nykaa was not an abstract customer demographic. She was a specific person, aspiring, modern, urban, and powerful. She was the leading lady of her own life. From the beginning, Falguni thought carefully about brand identity. The logo, the colors, the tone of voice. Nykaa would feel premium without being intimidating. It would feel accessible without being cheap. This balance, aspirational yet welcoming, would become the core tension that Nykaa managed better than almost any other brand in India. But before brand strategy came a more urgent problem: money. Falguni Nayar's background in investment banking was, paradoxically, both an advantage and a complication when it came to raising capital. The advantage was clear. She knew how investors thought. She understood the language of valuations, of cash flow projections, of market sizing. She had sat on the other side of the table hundreds of times. She knew what a compelling pitch looked like, and she knew how to construct one. The complication was subtler. Many investors, when they looked at Nyka's early pitch, saw a 50-year-old woman launching a startup in an industry she had never worked in before. The beauty e-commerce space was untested in India. The company had no track record, no proprietary technology, and was entering a market where logistics were still challenging and consumer trust in online retail was not yet fully established. She raised the initial capital anyway. She invested significantly from her own family's resources, a crucial signal to outside investors that she had real skin in the game. And she brought in early funding through angel investors and venture capital from institutional backers who recognized the size of the opportunity she had identified. From the start, Falguni made a strategic decision that would prove to be one of the most important of her career. Nyka would not be just another marketplace. Most e-commerce companies at the time operated on what's called a marketplace model. They were essentially platforms connecting buyers and sellers, holding no inventory themselves. This kept costs down and reduced risk, but it also meant very limited control over quality, authenticity, and customer experience. Nyka chose the inventory model. They would buy products directly from brands, stock them in their own warehouses, and ship them to customers. This was expensive. It was capital intensive. It was operationally complex. But it was the only way to guarantee authenticity. In a market where counterfeit cosmetics were a genuine public health concern, authenticity was not just a brand differentiator. It was a moral imperative. Women were putting these products on their skin, near their eyes, on their lips. A fake product wasn't just disappointing, it could be dangerous. By owning the inventory, Nyka could look every customer in the eye and say, what you are buying from us is real. It came from the brand. It came through the proper supply chain. You can trust it. This promise became the cornerstone of Nyka's relationship with its customers. But building trust takes time, and the early years of Nyka were genuinely difficult. The website launched in 2012. Traffic was slow to build. Convincing Indian consumers to buy beauty products, online products they were used to feeling, smelling, testing in person required patience and creativity. Convincing global beauty brands to partner with a small, unproven Indian startup required even more. Falguni handled both challenges with the same methodical, relationship-driven approach she had honed over 18 years in investment banking. She traveled, she met brand representatives in person, she presented data, she made promises, and then, critically, she kept them. One by one, brands came on board. First the Indian players, then the international ones. Prestige global names that had previously kept their Indian presence limited now saw, in Nyka, a credible and professional partner capable of representing their brands with the care those brands demanded. These weren't just listings on a website, they were endorsements. They were a signal. If these brands trust this platform, perhaps consumers could too. One of Falguni Nayar's most underappreciated strategic moves in the early years of Nyka was recognizing that selling beauty products online was fundamentally a content challenge. Think about what happens when a woman walks into a well-staffed beauty store. She's surrounded by testers. There are beauty advisors. She can try a lipstick. She can smell 3 different perfumes and decide which one makes her feel like herself. The physical retail experience is rich with information and sensation. Online retail strips all of that away. You're staring at a photo and a product description. To compensate, Nyka built one of India's most comprehensive beauty content ecosystems. The website wasn't just a store, it was a destination. There were tutorials on how to achieve specific looks. There were comparisons of similar products at different price points. There were articles on skincare routines, ingredient guides, reviews from real customers. Nyka launched a YouTube channel, a blog, and an online magazine. They understood that a woman who comes to their platform to learn about beauty is far more likely to become a loyal customer than one who simply arrives to make a transaction. They were building relationships. not just completing sales. Social media became a particularly powerful tool. Nykaa cultivated relationships with beauty content creators at a time when this form of marketing was still a relatively nascent concept in India. These were not major celebrities. They were real women with genuine expertise and authentic audiences, talking honestly about products they loved. This strategy created something invaluable: earned trust. Not purchased trust, not advertised trust, but the kind of trust that spreads from one woman to her friend, to her sister, to her colleague. The beauty consumer, Falguni had always understood, is extraordinarily loyal when you earn her trust, and extraordinarily unforgiving when you break it. Nykaa was relentless in protecting that trust. Customer service was taken seriously. Returns were handled gracefully. When products were damaged or late, they weren't hidden behind corporate language. They were acknowledged and made right. Slowly, then all at once, the word spread. Nykaa was the place to go. Here is where many pure-play e-commerce companies would have stayed: online. After all, the whole promise of digital retail was that you didn't need physical stores. No rent, no staff, no geography limitations. But Falguni Nayar saw something different. India is a country of staggering internal variety. The digital infrastructure in smaller cities was improving, but it was not uniform. More importantly, the nature of the beauty purchase, the desire to touch, to test, to experience, was not going away simply because e-commerce existed. And in India's premium beauty segment, physical presence carried a particular kind of credibility. Being in a mall in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Jaipur sent a message: we are real, we are here to stay. Nykaa began opening physical stores in 2014. Each store was designed with extraordinary care, not just as a place to sell products, but as an experience. The aesthetics were clean, warm, and modern. The staff were trained not just in sales, but in beauty education. The omnichannel strategy, the seamless integration of online and offline experiences, was unusual for an Indian startup at the time. And it worked. Customers who discovered Nykaa online would visit a physical store. Customers who experienced Nykaa in-store would start shopping online. Each channel reinforced the other. The physical stores also served a strategic purpose that went beyond consumer experience. They gave Nykaa leverage with brands. They transformed Nykaa from a delivery mechanism into something more powerful, a genuine partner in building the prestige beauty category across India. Somewhere along the way, Falguni Nayar made another bold move, one that would dramatically change Nykaa's financial profile. She launched Nykaa's own private label cosmetics. The thinking was shrewd. Nykaa had spent years accumulating something priceless: data. They knew exactly what their customers were searching for. They knew which products sold out fastest. They knew which price points generated the most conversions. They knew what colors were trending in Chennai and what skincare ingredients were most searched in Pune. They had more granular, real-time intelligence about the Indian beauty consumer than virtually any brand in the world. So they put that intelligence to work. Nykaa's own cosmetics launched with products specifically designed for Indian skin tones, a segment historically underserved by global beauty brands calibrated for lighter complexions. Their foundations, their lip colors, their eyeliners were not simply adaptations of Western products. They were built from the ground up with the Indian woman in mind. The private label strategy did something else too. It dramatically improved margins. Selling other brands' products earns you a distribution margin. Selling your own products earns you the full value. As Nykaa's private labels grew in popularity, they became an increasingly important driver of profitability. The company also diversified into adjacent categories: fashion, wellness, men's grooming, health, and nutrition. Each expansion was deliberate, each grounded in the same principle: curate well, build trust, create a premium experience at accessible prices. But through all of it, beauty remained the core, the beating heart of everything Nykaa was and aspired to be. November 10th, 2021, Nykaa went public. The IPO was one of the most anticipated market events in India that year. The issue was subscribed over 80 times. The listing valued the company at more than $13 billion US. And in the days after the listing, something happened that captured the imagination of a nation. Falguni Nayar's personal net worth, based on her stake in the company, reached levels that placed her among the wealthiest women in India and one of the very few self-made female billionaires in all of Asia. But here's a number that perhaps matters more than the headline valuation. Falguni Nayar had built this from scratch. There was no inheritance, no family dynasty behind Nykaa, no enormous check from a foreign fund to start with. She had built it, step by step, decision by decision, deal by deal. The scale of what she achieved and the age at which she started sent a seismic message through India's entrepreneurial landscape. You don't have to be 25. You don't have to be from a tech background. You don't have to be a man. The window for building something extraordinary does not close at 30 or 40 or 50. Sometimes, a life fully lived is exactly the preparation you need. Falguni Nayar had not pivoted away from her banking career. She had used it. She had taken every lesson, every relationship, every skill she had accumulated over nearly 2 decades and deployed them in service of something new. Now let's understand it. What were the specific, concrete, sometimes contrarian decisions that made Nykaa what it became? First, the inventory model. When every rational voice in Indian e-commerce said marketplace, Falguni said no. We will own the inventory. We will absorb the cost and the complexity because authenticity is not negotiable in beauty. This decision was painful in the early years. It constrained growth, but it built the foundation of consumer trust that everything else was built upon. Second, the content-first approach. Before content marketing was a mainstream concept in India, Nykaa was building one of the country's most robust beauty media ecosystems. They weren't trying to push products at customers. They were trying to educate them, inspire them, serve them. The transaction was a natural consequence of the relationship. Third, the omni-channel bet. Nykaa refused to be defined as an online company. They understood that the Indian consumer's relationship with commerce was complex, layered, and deeply physical. They built stores not because they had to, but because they understood their customer. Fourth, private labels at the right moment. Nykaa didn't launch its own products on day one. It waited. It earned trust first, accumulated data, understood the market, and then leveraged all of that to launch products that were not guesses, but certainties. Fifth, the brand equity of Falguni Nayar herself. In India, founder stories matter enormously. Consumers and investors alike are drawn to people they can believe in. Falguni's story, the quiet, disciplined professional who walked away from security at 50 to bet on her own vision, was not just compelling, it was aspirational. It told Indian women everywhere, your dreams don't have an expiration date. Sixth, and perhaps least visible, the culture she built. Nykaa became a company with a mission that its employees actually believed in. The founding story attracted talent that was not just skilled, but motivated. And motivated teams, as any business builder will tell you, are the true engine of scale. Nykaa's story is not without complexity. And a telling that only celebrates the triumph without acknowledging the difficulty would be dishonest. After the IPO, as with many newly public companies, Nykaa's stock price faced significant volatility. Questions were raised about its path to sustainable profitability. Analysts noted that margins, particularly in the fashion business, needed improvement. Competitors better funded horizontal platforms, international beauty brands launching their own direct channels. New specialty rivals began to crowd the market. The beauty e-commerce space that Falguni had essentially created now attracted serious competition from all sides. Large conglomerates with enormous resources entered the beauty space. Global marketplaces began building out their beauty categories more aggressively. Nykaa faced the challenge that every pioneer eventually faces. What do you do when everyone you inspired decides to follow you into your space? Falguni's response has been characteristic of her entire approach. Methodical, long-term, and grounded in the fundamentals that made Nykaa successful in the first place. She has spoken about the need to deepen, not just expand, to serve the customer more profoundly, not just reach more of them. She has continued to invest in Nykaa's private labels, recognizing that owned brands are more defensible than distribution businesses. She has pushed into smaller cities, where the next wave of India's beauty consumer growth will come. None of this diminishes what has been built. Disruption is always followed by competition. That is how markets work. The measure of a pioneer is not whether competition arrives, it always does. The measure is whether the foundation they built is strong enough to endure it. Nykaa's foundation, its brand trust, its customer relationships, its private label portfolio, its omni-channel presence is very strong indeed. Step back from the balance sheets and the IPO headlines for a moment. What did Falguni Nayar actually build? She built a company. Obviously, a company worth billions. A company that employs thousands of people, that sells products to tens of millions of customers, that has made international beauty brands genuinely invested in serving the Indian market. But she built something else too, something harder to quantify. She built proof. Proof that you can start a company at 50 and build something world-class. Proof that deep consumer insight and business discipline can be more powerful than technical background or venture capital connections. Proof that India's beauty market, long conditioned to treat Indian women's tastes as derivative, as imitations of Western preferences, could produce a global quality platform built specifically for its own women. She also built a symbol. In a country where the conversation around women in business leadership often focuses on the exceptions, on the extraordinarily rare stories of women who somehow made it to the very top, Falguni Nayar became something that went beyond exception. She became an argument that the structures preventing women from reaching leadership are not about capability, but about opportunity, access, and above all, belief. Young women who saw Falguni Nayar's name on the cover of business magazines did not see a novelty. They saw a possibility. They saw someone who came from a country they knew, who had built something extraordinary, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Nykaa is perhaps the purest expression of a simple but radical thesis. Companies that understand women, that are built by women, that center women's experiences have a structural advantage in serving the world's most powerful consumer force. On any given day in India, millions of women open the Nykaa app. Some are browsing, some are buying, some are learning, watching a tutorial, reading about skincare ingredients, comparing two foundations to find the one that matches their exact skin tone. They are doing these things because a woman in Mumbai decided, at the age of 50, to bet everything she had on a simple conviction: that Indian women deserved a better, more honest, more empowering beauty experience. That woman is still there, still at the helm, still thinking about the next 10 years the way she once thought about the next investment thesis, carefully, ambitiously, and with the quiet confidence of someone who has already proven more than once that her judgment is worth trusting. Falguni Nayar did not just build a beauty company. She built a mirror, one that reflected back to millions of Indian women the image of themselves they had always wanted to see. Capable, beautiful, worthy, in the spotlight. In the beginning, she gave her company a name that meant leading lady. It turned out she was talking about herself.